Today we have Habib from Writer, as well as Ofir Krakowski from DeepPub, along with our moderator, Haje on Kamps. Please welcome them all to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So, Corinne says she hasn't seen whole articles written by ChatGPT yet, but she definitely edits my stuff, so we'll see how that goes. I'm just kidding. So I actually, every couple of weeks, try to get ChatGPT to write articles for me, and every time, there's just no heart and no passion. And I fear that that's about to change. Mary, for how long will I have a job?
May.
Oh, sorry.
I
May.
think you'll have a job for a long time. It's like just absolutely not in question. We last month worked with Kyle Shaika at The New Yorker and fine-tuned one of our writer models on, yes, a bunch of stuff they had written at The New Yorker, but maybe like 50,000 words of his like corpus, and he did find it like super eerie. But is it going to write full-on New Yorker articles? No. We did have like some fun experiments where we would take TechCrunch articles and rewrite them as The New Yorker, and they would start off with these like rambling anecdotes. So yeah, you can have a lot of fun with it. It'll help you, but you're good. I think you're safe.
I'm very glad to hear that. So what are AIs particularly bad at right now?
It's bad at knowing things that only you know. Mm-hmm. And that may sound like tautological, but the LLMs are predictive machines. Like I think we all in the room already know that AI can write words, but can't understand them. So we've got a lot of exciting techniques, though, and a whole ecosystem of tooling to solve what I'm calling the last mile problem, which is actually 80% of the work. But LLMs are a great utility to get you started on a lot of these fun generation challenges, but alone aren't super good at human quality reasoning or generation.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing that's happening because essentially the LLMs are statistical models. We're talking about that backstage for a moment. And there are things you can say in one language that you absolutely cannot say in another because it's just the wrong thing to say. How do you get AIs to deal with things like cultural differences or language differences?
So actually, this is a great way to emphasize the limitation of AI. For example, everybody in the audience would understand the phrase, hold your horses, but a straight translation into any language would be wrong, right? So what we're training the machine is to understand some of the idioms, but still, in the process of translating into different languages, we use humans to curate the end results. For example, another example is a joke. A joke is a very cultural thing, and when you take a joke and you straight translation of it, it would be wrong. It won't work. And currently, translating jokes with AI is a difficult to impossible task for AI currently.
Yeah.
But Ofir, you could take a model and say, replace every joke that is specific to a culture with like an anecdote that is like generic. You could use the models to solve those problems.
Yes, definitely. But the kind of work that we're doing is a very high quality work. For example, we're doing work for the big studios. So in a movie, you don't want to, I know you don't want it to be an anecdote. So obviously, AI are very accurate and very good on the average side of things. But when you want higher quality, for example, writing an article, a very cool article that everybody would love to read, then you would need a person to curate it. So it's a great tool, as you said.
Yeah. What's interesting, I mean, English is my third language, and your idiomatic example was interesting. In Dutch, if something is very surprising, you might say, now comes the monkey out of the sleeve, which, is funny to us because it makes absolutely no sense. But it stops being funny when you realize that really gets in the way of communicating. I'm curious, with your tools that are trained for different use cases, could you say more about how that actually, where the rubber hits the road. Like, what is that, who is using it for what and why?
Yeah, great question. So we are a full stack generative AI platform. So what that means is we combine a large language model, ours, with knowledge graph. So think of it as like RAG type of solutions and AI guardrails together. So let's say you are a wealth management company and you've got wealth managers who spend a lot of their week putting together like proposals for individuals, and they're looking at a Charles Schwab statement and a bunch of like KYC documents and a bunch of intake forms. It's actually a wonderful use case for being able to take structured and unstructured data together to put together 2 to 3 pages of prose. There is a lot of last mile work to actually go from, yay, I have an LLM in my own environment and I've got an API to it, to I've got something that 2,000 wealth managers can now use. And so that's what we call a use case. And breaking down that use case into what's going to be required, what tooling is required to get the accuracy that you need, what am I going to ask the user for in creating this new workflow, because as Ofir said, you have to have the expert really driving that workflow. You're not going to press a button and you suddenly have this proposal that you're going to send to a client. So the use case-based approach really is very practical and rooted in reality, and then all of the data work isn't some kind of theoretical big thing. It's let's get this number of examples of proposals that look like this, and bank statements that look like that, and KYC documents that are, like handwritten versus typed. And so you break down the problem and can actually ship something that is useful.
And you had some news recently. Y'all raised a god-awful amount of money at a $500 million valuation.
Thanks, Haje. We didn't disclose the valuation, but we did raise $100 million, yeah.
What's next? Yeah, right?
Thank you. So what's next is we're growing every team. So if you or folks would like to work at a super fun, like real use case-based generative AI company, please hit me up. I'm May at Writer. And what's next is multimodal. What's next is agents. What's next is multilingual. But the multilingual approach for me is like all about, because we used to run a localization company, is really all about generating a native language versus translating, which I think has to be a human approach for it to really get to the quality that's required for our use cases. But yeah, some fun stuff coming down the pike.
Awesome.
Thanks, Haje.
Multilingual is kind of your bread and butter. Can you say a little bit about what you do that gives a little bit of context?
Yeah, so what we actually developed is a platform that enables to localize content simultaneously into more than 65 languages while preserving the original experience. This allows people, even in the US, to enjoy content, international content.
And so that is both subtitling and dubbing, right?
Yes, we're doing both kind of work and we're working with the big studios, distributors, and enterprises around the globe.
So can you give some examples of who you're working with?
For example, we worked with the streaming platform, probably you don't know them, but Topic.com, because they are specializing in dark noir kind of drama TV series. They are only specializing in drama series that are coming from international sources that were not created, and they are bridging this language barrier. Because if you watch a Danish kind of a dark noir, it's very hard for an English audience to watch this kind of content. So with our solution, they can do it very efficiently and in a very high quality.
And so the thing that comes out of your platform, do you consider that like, okay, this is done now, or is it an early draft of a translation? Like how good is it right now?
So actually taking content from one language into multiple languages requires different stages. First, you have to transcribe it, so the model needs to transcribe and to understand the original language, and it should do it very well. Secondly, it has to translate it, which is, in most cases, a straight translation. And then there goes another part, which is adaptation. Adaptation is adapting the translation to the local culture. We talked about jokes and idioms, and this is the third part. And the last part is creating the voices. And creating the voices also have to relate first to the original, because you want it to be a seamless experience, but also to the culture that you are referring, the target language that you are referring to. So we're doing all of these processes. This is a very convoluted process and a very convoluted workflow, but the use case is simple and is well understood what it's for. And actually, we're enabling people to overcome the language barrier. Actually, free people from this barrier.
Yeah, no, I love that. I was playing around with Writer and kind of trying to figure out how it all works, and I noticed that you have specifically something that you call AI guardrails. And I thought that was a really interesting concept in terms of keeping it on the right track. Can you say a little bit more about why did you decide to develop that, and how has that evolved over time?
Yeah. The last mile means that the content or the answer really has to be correct and fit into workflows where we now don't have hundreds of people checking this process. So the accuracy really has to be high. And what we found is for certain kinds of brand and editorial guidelines, if you are United Healthcare, and they're a big writer customer, and you've got to write at a 4th grade reading level because of state guidelines for Medicaid content, and you put it into a prompt, you're going to fail those state reviews. So the NLP post-processing is really important. And there'll be, we'll use smaller helper LLMs to do a lot of those microservices, but there are hundreds of different AI guardrails under the Writer umbrella for everything from tone and character count to grade level and clarity. And then you've got accuracy and compliance, and there's a whole host of categories where it's just not good enough and not accurate enough, 4 nines of consistency to be able to put it into the prompt or have it run through the LLM only.
Yeah. And I imagine one of the things that comes, you mentioned data accuracy, right? I asked a ChatGPT 4, I think, to write me a bio. And the bio was incredibly accurate and really sure about absolutely everything, and said I had a different birthday. And so it's interesting, right? Because most of it was absolutely 100% correct. And so I could easily be led to assume that everything was correct. And I imagine if you're doing stuff for healthcare, does it flag, hey, I'm not completely sure about this piece of data? Or is there a way to know whether or not it's hallucinating?
Yeah, we call it claim detection. So anything that is a statistic or a fact, or we can't find it in something you put into the context window or the knowledge base that you are associating with that use case, we will highlight in purple for the end user, and they got to go through and click that they have
Citation needed.
Yeah, and there's an API for that too. So if you've integrated the use case into some workflow, you can actually call the claim detection API. So the folks who are most advanced in the enterprise are thinking about what kind of AI literacy and AI education do we do for our workforce, because if you are that person who is writing, if you're the wealth manager who is using AI now to write a proposal, you still got to read every line of it, because you're going to get on the phone and present that to your client, or they're going to come into your office and talk about it. And so the Intuit has this really, our customer too, they do this fun 10-slide watch outs. Before anybody can use Writer, and they also have an internal tool, you got to go through this test, right? And it's very simple, but it is a real important step in someone's adoption journey to say, here are the things that you really do need to watch out for, or things that we need to make sure folks are educated on, what the models can do and what they possibly could not know, so you've got to check.
Yeah. Well, and this is beyond writing as Hemingway or making a pretty picture. You're literally talking about wealth managers, so this is millions, if not billions of dollars, and people's healthcare things. So it absolutely has to be correct.
Yep.
Is there a way to report? Just hey, this isn't right, or where did this come from kind of thing?
So there is a whole body of research around explainability in generative AI, and there's some really promising research, including things that we are doing around like literally going to the weights of where something may have come from. But the most important thing is really to show somebody the source. So where in your knowledge graph or in the content that's been associated with the use case did something come from? And in that case, really help develop the muscle memory of like tracing back an answer to the kind of the derivative pieces of content or kind of foundational type knowledge that came in from the database.
Yeah. I was working with one startup who tried to train their language models on like a whole knowledge base, which is wonderful, except the knowledge base included 3 generations of the software,
Totally.
right? And so you end up reporting like, yeah, you can definitely do that by clicking this button, which was removed 6 years ago, kind of thing.
Yeah. Ontology is a big problem.
Yeah, no, I imagine. And then you end up with very interesting data hierarchies to try and even figure out what that means, for sure. So as a journalist, I use a bunch of different tools to transcribe my interviews, the prep calls, and that kind of thing. And it is astonishing how bad it is if anybody speaks in any different way. Like in our interview, you speak with a slight accent. It was gibberish. If I interview somebody who is Scottish, may as well forget about it. Like, why are AI still so terrible at this?
I believe that AI is currently not as good as we want it to be because it is trained on the average kind of data. It's a statistical model, so it works on the average data. So if I have an accent, this is not an average on when we speak English. Most of the English speakers speak with a fluent accent. So this is why those models are failing. Actually, what we do is we fine-tune the models on accents or different languages. This is why they become multilingual, and then they can understand better accents.
So what does that actually look like, training it? Like, do you feed it a bunch of audio that has already been transcribed, or like, how do you train it?
Maybe I'll give a great example that you probably won't understand about LLMs, but for example, when we're using our technology, the pre-trained multilingual model, and we fit it with a sentence, for example, that has the word Chanel. Chanel is the famous, fashion house. The LLM, just say it as channel, because in English it reads it as channel. This is the obvious average what an English-speaking person would say. But if you want to fine-tune it, what you have to do is to fine-tune it on French language or French words, and then you can understand that there might be French language out there.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing, in a lot of languages, you intentionally mispronounce things, like names, for example. The Norwegian name Kjetil, nobody gets right, so it is pronounced Kjetil. But in English, that would then be correct. So now you have to train the language both the way it's meant to be pronounced and the way you're meant to mispronounce it. Like, that just breaks my brain. And we do that as humans. We do that all the time.
Yes. What we use in our technology is building glossaries. It's not AI. It's like all technology. But it's to solve this problem because current LLMs cannot cope with this kind of, even a joke. Take a joke. It's just taking something which is said and flipping it around. This is why it makes us laugh, because it's like the flip side of it. It's just making things nonsense.
Right.
But when you're, in your case, what you just said, what we build is a glossary that the AI is complementary to the model, and then the model can, just understand this is a word that I can take it just as in the glossary,
Right.
not do anything.
It's like trying to learn German, where you go, here's the rule, and here's the 5,000 exceptions. Yeah, totally. What is currently hard for actually building the models and building the exceptions that live in like a knowledge base or a generation tool like Writer?
I think some of it is what Ofir said. Sometimes we'll come in and a customer hasn't been able to get a solution beyond like a 50 or 60% accuracy, right? And they're just like trying too hard. And like that example of using the glossary, instead of like trying to get the LLM to do it is a decent example. And there's research now that shows that a lot of the smaller models are actually higher performing on certain language tasks than bigger models. And sometimes like switching to a combination of tasks that are associated with different models that are doing specific things actually produces a better output. So I think the general challenge is a lack of familiarity of both the LLM and the NLP kind of techniques that are required to get some of the results, and sometimes an overbuilding or an over-reliance on prompt engineering.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine also if you limit the sets, you actually have much higher chances of success. Like if it's a drive-through, you're not expecting them to understand everything. You can't ask every question to a drive-through attendant. It's mostly about do you want fries or not, and that's like having those options makes it a lot easier than saying, hey, what's the capital of Zambia? They're like, look, I don't know. I'm just here to sell you fast food kind of thing, right? So how do you limit the scope of the piece that they do need to know about, or is that actually much easier than it sounds?
So it's a good question. The use case-based approach has us asking folks a lot of the time, like, building a generic, company X GPT is fun to get everybody into the technology and their fingernails dirty with how stuff works. But in general, are probably too generic to do anything so excellently well that it replaces whole workflows. And so we think the answer is really the ability to build multiple digital assistants or Q&A at scale. And so if you are building a sales enablement bot that is actually associated with a different knowledge graph than a bot that helps folks understand the policies of HR or kind of the internal company. And so really thinking about what do you actually, the jobs to be done, what do you actually want the thing to do, and then working backwards. And a lot of times, we're actually, if the answers are wrong, we're taking a look at the data and we're maybe using an LLM, a small one, to transform the data, right? And then trying again with the same prompt, the same model, and it works so much better. So, the taking a real 360 approach is fun, and we transfer that to our customers. We want them to learn alongside us as well.
Mm-hmm. What is the bleeding edge for you right now? Like, what is the thing that is like the furthest reach into AI generated tech?
Yeah, I think it's probably what we're calling level 3 question and answering. So you guys might have seen the CNBC headline yesterday that Morgan Stanley built, a chat GPT-like thing to query like 100,000 research documents, except the catch is everybody's got to write in perfect English full sentences or the model gets confused, which is hilarious. Like, who does that? And so, I do think kind of bleeding edge is sort of level 3, like, can I actually talk to the model and ask a question that is really like multi-concept, that combines, a couple asks in one, and uses like contextual knowledge that is really specific to the company, right? Referring to databases or products or concepts that are really company specific and not that general. That's bleeding edge for us.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so interesting because a lot of the time the AIs and stuff that we as consumers are get to touch, like Siri and like some of the Google Assistants stuff, they're surprisingly not very smart.
I mean, you can't even be like, you're in San Francisco, what's the weather in London? And it gets it right. Like, I mean, who knows? Now, apparently, Amazon Alexa is LLM powered. I haven't been home to try it yet. So.
Right, this is the problem of fundraising and coming here,
Yeah.
What's the cutting edge for you? Like, because I can imagine there's a whole bunch of really interesting things with speech generation and translation and.
Yes, so we talked about translation. Translation is still something that we're working on. And in terms of, it's not only getting it right, but also understanding the emotion, understanding the emphasis, the right emphasis, where you need to put the emphasis in different places. But I think that the future holds doing it in real time. Can you do a sport event or news? This is something that currently is not available due to the restriction of the translation, mostly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess simultaneous interpretation is one thing, but not to multiple languages and not AI-powered.
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
And also enabling, humans to be more effective. This is something that, current AI models are, what they are doing is that are just a tool. They're enabling people to be more productive, more effective, and more creative in a way. You can use the model just to get the ideation part faster. So even us, we're working with our technology to enable people to have a more creative approach
Love
to
that.
content.
Very cool.
And how does that work with, so I have worked with text-to-speech, and most of the time, you get a little bit of melody and a little bit of color in the language that feels very good. But if you're doing acting, for example, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're angry, like there's emotion behind it. And a director can say, do that again, but try that again with emotion. Can you do that with the AI voices now?
Yes, so this is a good question that you ask, because this is a very difficult task for current text-to-speech models. But what we have developed is a way that you can direct the machine to say something in a different way, in a different emotion. You can do it by shouting, by singing, by whispering. It's pretty cool, the technology to do it, but it's still to a certain limit, right? Because emotion is varied from 0 to 100. There's a lot of gray areas.
Right.
Still, the models can do it in a very limited way. So
Right.
it could go with
really good actors are able to pretend to be angry, and as a viewer, you're like, oh, he's pretending to be angry, right? And now you're into like multiple layers of different types of expressions of voice.
Right. This is a good notion because it's built on different or a multimodality problem, because it's built in the language that you use, but also on the intonation of how you use it. So it's not only the voice, it's also the language, the translation that you spoke and how you spoke it.
Yeah. And is that something that, like, how would you do that? Do you have to write a prompt? Do you highlight it and bold it or something? Like, how does that work in your tool?
So actually, what the machine is doing is looking at the original, trying to imitate the way the original was. It's just preserving the original experience. But obviously, it's not 100% accurate, as most of the LLMs and most of the AI models that you have out there. So we have language experts within the region that go over the end result and then fix in the places where it needs to be fixed. And those fixes are fed into the machine so it learns for the next time.
One of the narratives that often comes up around AI is they took our jobs. Could you both speak to that? Like, to what degree is what you're doing reducing the amount of jobs that are available?
Yeah. Honestly, like, I really can say this with a straight face, we create jobs because there's so much shit to do to actually like put these use cases into production that a lot of our customers can't fill those jobs fast enough. AI program directors and managers, people to really think about data, people who are developing use cases, people who are training folks on how to, transform these workflows. And, some of that is companies have budget now to experiment with AI. It's like seemingly the only thing there's extra budget for is figuring out generative AI, but they're not actually putting that towards headcount to make the gains real. And so I do think there's going to be a bit of a reckoning with that in a few quarters where, CFOs are going to be like, show me what you did with a few $1 million. But in terms of like actually, we work with a lot of CMOs, CDOs, chief digital officers, like the jobs are certainly transforming. How we do the jobs is transforming, but nobody is cutting heads who really believes in content or digital or brand. I think that's different in SMB world. I do think it's different, but in our space, I feel like we've got a long ways before there aren't going to need to be people at the helm.
Yeah. There's currently an actual writer's strike on, right? You're in this world where people are going to be nervous. What's your take on this?
As of today, nobody lost his job because of what we do.
How do you
Actually,
know?
most of our customers are looking to monetize on content that was not economically viable to monetize on. So actually, we're enabling them to do more work. And as I explained, we use the same professional from within the industry to curate the result of the machine. So actually, we're bringing more job to the same people, right? So current phase, actually, there is more work to be done by those professionals than was before.
All right, well, let's leave it at that, I guess. AI creates jobs. Thank you so much for joining me on stage, and thank you all for coming today. Have a great show.
Thank you.